A huge welcome this afternoon to the webinar Voices from the Gallery, which has a specific focus on audiences and engagement. And a massive thanks to Art Fund and Claw Leadership for partnering with each other to create these spaces for these really important conversations. Practical things just before we dive in, there's a stream text link for those of you that want it, and a reminder that we're going to record this webinar for access to those who might want to see it later on the Claw Leadership web pages and the Art Fund web pages too. So Claw Leadership is working in partnership with the Art Fund on a suite of activities for those working in galleries and museums yourselves, essentially. And part of that is 2 webinars, and today is the second of those, which is going to include speakers and case studies from leaders working in the sector. And these sessions aim to inspire, to showcase best practice and game changers in leadership, to highlight case studies, to share challenges and successes, and to provide inspiration, and hopefully as well, actionable advice that you can take away, some of those top tips that you can apply to your own context. I'm your host for this afternoon, and I'm Amanda Smethurst. I'm a Claw Fellow, and I also work as a Claw Associate. And my passion and my background has always been around engagement, from my early career when I worked within gallery spaces, now through to my time with Creative People and Places and other projects. Engagement and people taking part in cultural activities is my bag. So I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon. We know this area of practice is really important now. Questions of how to engage during COVID, when we had to literally rip up the rule book and start again, have really encouraged and allowed people to think about how to work well with audiences and in the kind of engagement sphere, and how to re-engage on new terms. There's also a question about the sense of spaces and who they belong to, who they're for, where those voices are heard and represented. And strategically, we know as well with the Arts Council strategy, Let's Create, there's a huge emphasis on strands around inclusivity and relevance, for example. So today is timely. The webinar today creates a space for sharing some of these perspectives, these insights, these issues, these areas of potential for leaders working in this area of practice of audience and engagement. And for those of you driving forwards innovation in audience engagement as well. And we hope that this afternoon there'll be rich conversation and some rich ideas that you'll hear from around practical work, as well as that kind of notion of leadership and where that goes now. So within this webinar, you'll shortly hear from 3 panelists who've joined us this afternoon, and we're delighted to have you with us. We have Jen Ridding, who's the Head of Public Engagement at the Barber Institute of Fine Art, Ian Reid, who's Head of Engagement and Content at Lakeland Arts, and Robin Kazosi, who's Head of Public Engagement at the Migration Museum. And through their talks and provocations, our panelists will be exploring case studies and key questions for leaders in museums and galleries. They're going to highlight some of their approaches to engagement, and particularly how this might have changed over the last 16 months during such a time of change anyway for us all. And we hope to hear some of their tips or learnings from their recent experience that you might take away and think about within your own practice as well. After the provocations, we're going to have a conversation, myself and the panelists, we're going to have a conversation around leadership and around practice to draw out some of this thinking. And then we'll have time for questions from all of you. So please pop your questions in the chat as we go. And if you can preface it with the word question, just so we can help spot them, that would be brilliant. And we will come to them towards the end of the event. But if questions pop into your mind, feel free to drop them in the chat when they're there. And a reminder that we're recording this to share on websites. And I think that's all I need to say before we kick off. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to our panelists. So as I said, we've got 3 people joining us who all bring their passion for audiences and engagement, along with their leadership experience. And they're all sharing this through 3 slightly different lenses. Everyone's been asked to speak for 8 minutes. And as I said, if questions occur to you as they're speaking, please pop them in the chat for later. First up, we have Jen Ridding, who's Head of Public Engagement at the Barber Institute of Fine Arts, which is based in Birmingham and is home to one of the finest small art galleries in Europe. Jane is going to pick up conversation around the Institute's Health and Public Engagement Programme, which works with visitors, communities and students. So a massive welcome to you, Jen.
Thank you, Amanda. I'll just share my screen. How's that look? Good, thanks, thumbs up. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much, Amanda, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. Yes, I'm Jen. Hello, everybody. So in this short opening sharing, I'm going to talk about some of the work, the engagement practice that we've done at the Barber over the last 15 months. And as Amanda said, through the particular lens of Barber Health. And then I'm also going to share some thoughts or provocations around the role of leadership around audiences and engagement in this moment. So here's the Barber Institute. As Amanda said, we're in Birmingham. That's our building on the left of the screen. And we're on the University of Birmingham's campus, which you can see there. It's about 2 miles outside of the city centre. And within that wonderful Grade 1 building is home to our brilliant but small art collection. It's a collection of paintings, sculpture, works on paper and coins. And prior to the pandemic, our engagement practice was very much focused on engagement in that place. It was these galleries, that building and that location. And as Amanda said, I love this phrase, we really did have to rip up the rule book because that was very much our practice. So in April 2020, we launched Barber Home. This is our artist commissioning programme. It's an engagement programme that works wholly online. And through this work, we work with families, students, young people and adults, and commission anything from artists, opera singers, chefs and yoga teachers to interpret the collection through an engagement practice. And during the pandemic, we've of course had to remodel our schools programme like many other colleagues in the sector. And we've taken that from a wholly on-site programme to a digital programme of online resources, live streamed workshops into classrooms and also postal packs too. And if you'd like to know any more about those programmes, there's contact details at the end of the presentation because I haven't got time to go into depth right now. So to Barber Health, this is our creative arts, health and wellbeing programme for hyper-local communities. And it runs alongside and is woven within our innovative contributions to medical and healthcare education that's taking place at the University of Birmingham. So it really draws on our distinctive context as a world-class art gallery on a red brick Russell Group University campus that doesn't teach any kind of practical creative art discipline, in the most diverse city in Birmingham, and a city that's been absolutely buffeted by COVID and is continuing to be so. So we asked ourselves, what does that mean and what can we do in that context? And we were fortunate enough to be awarded a Respond and Reimagine grant from the Art Fund to go away and ask that question for 12 months. So thank you to the Art Fund for that support. The project has 5 strands, which you can see on screen. I suppose the one that's garnered most attention is the nursing residence. I've had so many questions going, what's a nursing residence? Why do you have one? And what does it mean? And what do they do? So perhaps we might explore some of that in the discussions afterwards, or of course, drop me a line. But the nursing residence is also a nursing lecturer within the University Med School. So it makes that link to the bottom point where it's embedded within those collaborations. And they were collaborations that we've been building in the 3 years previous to COVID. So that doesn't come as scratch. Recovery Art is another strand of our Barber Health programme, and this is our programme for adults who are living with or working through physical or mental conditions, and that's their definition. It's self-referral. This had been running for about 8 years on site, so again we've pivoted this programme and we now run it as a hybrid analogue and digital programme, and it's very much becoming a model of collective co-production with the members of those 2 groups really making decisions about how that work's going to go forward. And there's no doubt that developing and delivering this work in a pandemic is really challenging. We've had wow moments, we've had heads in hand moments, and we've had what I call the roundabout moments, where we can either hop, skip or jump around the barriers that are in front of us. So we're working our way through it as we speak. So finally, some reflections, some learnings, or as I like to put it, what is on my mind or what's been on my mind, and what does kind of leadership look like in terms of audiences and engagement in this moment. So some provocations. So space, as Amanda helpfully said in her intro, which we didn't plan, is very much on my mind. When we reflected in the pause that COVID offered, we realised that our engagement practice really didn't have any space prior to COVID. No space to reflect, no space to ask questions, no space to breathe. So space within our practice is something that we really, really want to hold on to and embed within our work. And I'm also thinking around spaces. So as Amanda said, as we return to physical spaces, what does physical space really mean? What's it for and who's it for? And as I say, our pre-COVID practice was so embedded in a physical space and very much on our terms, I'll be honest about that. And also digital space, what does that mean now we move forward out of lockdown and restrictions, and how can we really create equitable spaces? So constructing and reconstructing our ecology. I'm encouraging everyone I work with to be really mindful around whether we're constructing from scratch as we're in this period of rebuilding out of COVID, or are we reconstructing something that we had before? And what needs constructing from the beginning and what needs rebuilding, and knowing what we're doing when, and being really mindful and conscious in those decisions. Uncertainty is the certainty. Well, if the last 15 months have proven anything, it's absolutely this fact. But I'm really interested in how do we thrive and flourish in long-term uncertainty. Uncertainty's always been the landscape. As human beings, we want to control everything and predict everything, and we can't. And the last 15 months have reminded us of that fact. So what do we need to do as leaders to create the conditions for our teams, our partners, our collaborators, our audiences to flourish in uncertainty? And how can we make that a really fruitful place to be? A culture of action research is something that I've tried to build at the Barber from day one. So all of our engagement practice is couched as action research. Everything we do is a question, everything we do is an inquiry. And we seek answers, but we don't know them. And I think if we can frame our work in that way, and particularly when we've had to pivot quickly, it allows us to get things wrong and perhaps fail, but do that in a really constructive and critical way. And checking our assumptions. What did we know? What do we know now? And what do we think we know, but we actually don't know it? So actually questioning is now integral to what we do. And finally, we're all human. So can we embed real care in our practice? The title of this presentation was From Heart to Heart, which is actually from the voice of one of our recovery art group who wrote this really short little note to us. And that phrase, from the heart to heart, really struck with me. And actually, can we create a practice of care, humanity, and from the heart to heart? So thank you so much. There's contact details if you'd like to get in touch. And I've also put the contact details of our Barber Health coordinator, Sheila, if you'd like to specifically find out more about that project. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. That was really, really brilliant, rich insight. And there's things in there that completely resonate, and I'm sure with many. I love the notion of wow, utto, and roundabout moments. I'm sure we've all had many of those over the past 15, 16 months. And that sense of creating conditions to flourish in uncertainty, recognizing where we are and where we're going to be for a while, I suspect too, amongst many other things, and equitable use of space. Lots of things in there that really, really resonate. And I'm sure will prompt questions from others as well. So a reminder to pop those in the chat as we go. I'm going to pass on now to Ian. Ian Reid is the head of engagement and content at Lakeland Arts. And Lakeland Arts Mend programme and museum on the Move programme connects museums with rurally isolated communities in Cumbria. And Ian is here to talk about that and many other things. So huge welcome, Ian.
Hi everyone. I don't have a presentation like Jen, so if people feel brave enough to put their camera on, it might be quite nice to see some faces, feel a little bit more engaged, and see if there's any shocks that happen. And I can. That's nice. Thank you. Hi. So yeah. So my job is head of engagement and content at Lakeland Arts, and I just wanted to start with summarising some of my thoughts I've been having around the Mend project. Just for chat later, and they are around three things. So how sustainable are community projects for arts organisations who are trying to be a business? Has community become shorthand to mean anything, any work that we do beyond the bricks? And has that kind of blurred understanding led to quite poor outcomes for some people? And finally, is community a heritage culture in rural areas? It's something that's happened in the past, but it's very difficult to achieve in the present. So it's something that I'm kind of wrestling with at the moment, this idea that maybe it's more difficult to do community engagement in rural areas. So there's just some things I've been thinking about and I'd like to pick up later. But in terms of the Mend project, I've been asked to talk about how that's diversified our audiences, how particularly staff have benefited, and I can see that Ella is in this audience, so she'll either agree or disagree. What learnings can develop partnerships in the future, and kind of leadership with audience engagement, some real great synergy with what Jen's been talking about before. So in terms of Mend, I'm not going to go into masses of detail. We do have a nice website on our page, which was, like a big win for us. But the purpose of what we did, of course, and we were supported very generously through the Art Fund's Respond and Reimagine grant, was to kind of change our practice. We have 4 sites, very much like Jen. We did a lot of our engagement on site, and we just had to really change how we did things because our audiences weren't coming, and there was a real worry that maybe learning and participation teams would be the last people to come back after furlough, and there was a real worry and risk of even losing some really skilled practitioners in the field. And my team, we had to kind of change our thought. We had done stuff in our previous lives with working in different ways, and we knew people would enjoy it. In fact, the original acronym for Mend was the E stood for enjoy, and that was really important, that these had to be enjoyable. They didn't have to be overly worthy, just really enjoyable ways in engaging with people. But to diversify audiences, we really had to start by diversifying the kind of the governance at senior management level, and there really had to be some change in thinking. We started off at senior management, we weren't furloughed, but there was this horrible expression I heard at one point where we would prioritize bringing back the staff who directly contributed to income. Now, I don't need to tell you who that wasn't referring to, but it wasn't referring to the participation learning team. And so there's a real challenge there about how we could start doing things differently with audiences if we couldn't start doing them differently within the organization. So that had to change. So that was innovative in itself. And I think in terms of when we apply for funding or we're asked to be more innovative, it's sometimes challenging to think that maybe what we're going to do doesn't sound that innovative, but maybe for you and your organization, it really is. So as a team, we wanted to be more useful. We wanted to be user-led, making and repairing on notions across our organization because we've got so many objects that we need to conserve. And if we conserve objects, we want to do the same with communities. So we wanted to think about a community in the same way we might consider an object. What does it need and how can we do that in the most appropriate way? Each of the 3 members of the team wanted to do it in different ways, and that was quite exciting. We had one key outcome, which was to be useful, but the 3 members of my team did it in different ways, more strategic, some more community driven, and one of them was a shielder, so she had to do it completely online. And maybe we'll pick up some of what those were in the chat later. In terms of benefiting staff, of course, they came back to work. The fund allowed them not to be flexi furloughed, which is a horrible expression we kept banding about. So it immediately increased their well-being. But what I didn't recognize or failed to recognize really was that they were coming back into entirely different jobs. They were doing community participation, and it is a totally different way of working. And I think if I'd have thought about it ahead of time, we might have planned that training into them to maybe talk to other organizations where they had real deep participatory practice. So it was quite challenging for all 4 of us really to think of a different way. So whilst they came back to work, their well-being's increased, after a while, I think it was quite a challenging way to work. There's no boundaries with communities. Once you close the door to a venue, you can kind of shut audiences out. But with community participation, they have your phone number, they're following you on Instagram, they can tweet to you, and it's entirely different and very challenging. Also, the pace in which participatory practice works is very different. So I think in terms of failings, which Jen's talked about before, for me, that was one of mine, that I didn't support the team in working in a new way. But of course, the benefits were vast. We shaped a bespoke project for people. They worked together for the first time on a project. It's attracted more funding because it's getting a bit of recognition. And we've already identified it as a legacy program from the outset. And it was a real morale boost for us, for people within the organization to start talking about learning for once. But the learnings that we've done as a team, and we have thoroughly evaluated this as we've gone along. We love learning. Like, the process of learning is like what drives us. And actually, to really co-produce with communities is really difficult, and we shouldn't think that they're just there to be worked with. You know, it is challenging, and we do, you know, ultimately someone needs to be responsible, and that's difficult because communities are responsible for themselves. And for you to kind of wade in and, oh, we're going to make a difference, we're going to mend with you, it has to be, the approach has to be, you know, really has to be taken well. But also it's quite hard to collaborate with colleagues when we're thinking about a different way. Our values might be shared, but they might manifest in different ways. And I think as a team, we thought, oh, people will just drop their work because we're doing stuff with communities. They'll just like embrace us. But of course, that's not happening. We've got a closed gallery. We're trying to move objects around, and people have to get on with their day-to-day work, regardless of whether this kind of new ambitious community project is exciting or not. And the other thing is, I would say for projects like this, the thing that can be kind of intimidating is getting it right. And I think if it's a good project with right intentions, it's a good project. And I think you've got to kind of hold on to that as a way of working, that, you know, you've really got to stand firm. You've got the right way of doing stuff. It is going to work out for you. It might not end how you wanted it to start, though. So in terms of thoughts for the future, in terms of leadership and kind of the role that I have, you know, how can you lead audiences? Is that something that is even something within our grasp? How can museums and galleries really give over authority to different people and have a voice? You know, there's people like museums and galleries because they are a voice of reason. So how do we change that? That's something that would be great to discuss here. And you know, if we don't get it wrong, communities are communities. They're just going to do stuff anyway. And I think that's the power and great thing about communities is, you know, to some extent, to hell with you, museums and galleries, we're communities, you know, do stuff for us. So just some kind of thoughts for the future, really. I can't believe I've spoken for 8 minutes, but there we go, I have, and all without images. And it was lovely to see everyone's faces. So thank you for sharing yours with me.
Thank you, Ian. That's really brilliant. Thank you. Echoing thank you to those of you that popped your cameras on there at request. Lots of stuff in there, and actually a connection across with Jen in that spirit of action research and trying stuff out and not quite knowing where it's going to go, but trusting the process and the risk that comes with that the result may look very different to where you started, and embracing that's what I had. And also that challenge of, if you're diversifying an audience, diversifying at the senior level within the team actually really matters, to be able to play that well actually and listen. And I love that notion of being useful as a key objective. It's very simple but incredibly powerful. So thank you, Ian. Again, lots of food for thought for everybody, and a reminder, if you have questions for Ian, throw them in the chat and we'll pick them up a little bit later. And now on to our third and final, but definitely not a case of last and least, speaker. So Robin Kazosi is the Head of Public Engagement for the Migration Museum. Huge welcome to you. And the Migration Museum occupies a unique place in the heart of the community, based in a shopping centre in Lewisham. And Robin's going to pick up on digital activity during the pandemic, which included the online exhibition Heart of the Nation, Migration and the Making of the NHS. So a massive welcome, Robin. Lovely to have you with us.
Hi. I am just going to share my screen. We good? Yes, great. Hi. So interesting hearing Ian and Jen talking, because we just have just such different challenges, but in some ways kind of the opposite ends of some of your challenges. So really briefly, I'm just going to give a bit of background about the Migration Museum for those of you that aren't familiar with us. So the Migration Museum doesn't have a permanent location. We've been in Lewisham since the start of 2020. Prior to that, we were in Southwark, and we are looking for a permanent home. So this kind of constant uncertainty, not knowing where you're going to be, not having a physical space, and we also don't have a collection. Our policy is to borrow but not retain. So very different challenges. So the Migration Museum, we are a museum in a shopping centre. So we're based in the heart of the shopping centre, which is really busy. It has around 200,000 visitors per week pre-COVID. And even now, it's kind of, I was there this morning and it's already, it's pretty busy again. There's a big Sainsbury's there, there's an M&S, there's, as well as kind of just your general kind of clothes shops and things. So a lot of visitors. And I think shopping centres are really interesting in that they are kind of one of the last few truly public spaces. So people sit, they come in, they have a chat, there's benches in the central square. Some people come in every week, some people come in every day. Some people do a bit of a family outing on a Saturday. And so from a public engagement perspective, it's really exciting because all of these barriers to entry, kind of symbolic, physical, cultural, and in our case, economic, because the museum's free, they're just not there. And also I was doing an engagement session actually this morning about evaluations, and we were talking about how even there's no heavy doors, there's no ramps, there's no kind of, we have two massive, you can kind of see them on the slide, two really big kind of open doors. You can quite literally drift in and drift out. And so I'll be honest, that does a lot of the work for us with regards to engagement, how we keep people there, how we talk to them. It's ongoing. But so, and then we're also in kind of one of the most diverse boroughs in London, and we're in a borough that has kind of very active citizens. So that's the Young Mayors Programme, I Am Lewisham, and various other kind of cultural organisations. So I suppose that is our backdrop of community. But I completely agree with what Ian said, and that I think community is just, it becomes such a shorthand for a myriad of things. And also as well, it becomes as if it's a kind of single object, which it's definitely not. So this is some of the so I suppose our reality actually hasn't, obviously we've not had the physical space, but in terms of how we work, collaboration was so embedded in what we did before anyway, and it had to be, because if we didn't know if we were having a physical space, we needed to be able to work with others. So I guess when it comes to kind of leadership and engagement, I was talk about passing the mic. I don't know if you've ever been at something where someone starts talking and they clearly don't really know that much, and the audience starts heckling them saying like, please pass the mic. And so for us, I think that's what collaboration is about really. And I think in working in partnerships, and when leading in partnerships, it's about leading with the values of the organisation and not with the rules and the red tape. And at knowing that because we have because we're small, because we don't have a collection, we have this wonderful flexibility, which absolutely is not without its challenges. So just some examples of how this can work. So this was Windrush Day a few years ago. We worked with an artist who had his collection here, and he put on an Elders Day for the elders in his community using his network. And they just had run of the museum for the day, basically. But of course, our visitors were welcome as well. And so we had this amazing mix of kind of new audiences. This was the Borderless Cup. So we worked with the Black Prince Trust, which was a community organisation on our estate. And we did a basketball and football tournament. Many of the young people in the estate had Caribbean heritage. They came back and we did the kind of ceremony at the museum. In terms of how this can work on digital, I think it's a lot about, you said something Ian, about kind of communities kind of like do stuff for us. And I think rather than us kind of, oh, we've got this great idea and we can do this, I think that it is do stuff for us, but I also think it's help us do our stuff and help us do it better. So this is an example of how we worked in our recent football campaign with the organisation Goal Click, who'd already collected refugee football stories. And on the right is an example of how it didn't work. We were hoping to work with the National Football Museum. They couldn't work to our quick turnarounds. So in the end, we kind of used someone from their Hall of Fame, but unfortunately we just couldn't make it work in time, which is a shame. But obviously, how am I doing for time? 2 minutes. I'm not going to go through all of these queer migrations. So where shall we go from? So yeah, I think there's very little red tape at the Migration Museum. I think that for us as well, it's been really about thinking about the very kind of relatively low level of requirements of the team for things that can make people feel engaged and make them feel like they have so for example, whether it's a bookshop, you can recommend a book, and actually that's something that our shop team could work quickly to turn that around, so people then say, oh, okay, and now I feel my story is represented. In terms of some of the challenges with that, often we have an idea, and then we actually find that when the community and people are coming in and visiting and talking to us, that's not what they want to do, and it does mean not being afraid to kind of rip up the rule book a little bit. And really briefly, because I know I wanted to get onto digital, I'm just going to talk a little bit about engagement outside of the museum, and how we've managed to bridge that gap between digital and physical in some spaces. So you might have seen this campaign that we've been running, England Without Immigration. So it's an out of home and digital campaign. And this is what some of the posters look like that are across the country. We wanted to do something that was hyper local as well. So obviously the Euro, a big national moment, but I don't know if any of you know kind of the footballing talent from Southeast London, but 65% of the Premier League, more or less, are foreign players, foreign-born players, and 12.5%, more or less, are from what they call the Golden Triangle, which is this Golden Triangle in Southeast London. So you've got like Ian Wright, David Rocastle, many others. I'm not a huge football fan, I'm not sure if you can tell. But there's all of these other community players. So whether it's, so here you can see Don Strapsey, he started a YouTube football team, the SE Dons. We've got Lucy Monkman, who plays for Dulwich Hamlet, which is a big local team. So we put this call out on social media and said, who are your South London football heroes? And they came back. And so it was a brilliant opportunity for us to do something that that connected to the campaign, but isn't identical. And I think, if anyone ever gets their eyebrows waxed, they all say your eyebrows are sisters, they're not twins. And I always think digital and in real life, they're not even necessarily sisters, they should be cousins. Because people that are digital natives don't just want to see exactly the same content online and then in person, because they notice it doesn't translate. So yeah, these are just some of the images, but I know we don't have that much time, so I'm gonna wrap that up here. Hopefully lots to talk about.
Thank you, Robin. I love that notion of eyebrows as sisters, but also pushing that further to digital and real life as cousins. I'm going to take that. That's all right. I love that because it makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah, don't do your eyebrows as cousins though, because it's not a good look.
Thank you. That notion of space and fluidity, and even that sense of borrowing things rather than having a collection, is really interesting. So completely kind of opposite end of the spectrum in a way to Jen and Ian in the way that they're speaking. And also the philosophy of passing the mic and leading by values. And communities helping us do stuff better. So it feels really interesting because, as we said at the beginning, we've got 3 different lenses to explore these themes of audience and engagement through, which is really helpful to kind of have those kind of perspectives to kick off from. So a reminder to everybody, I haven't spotted any questions yet, but please do put questions in the chat for Robin, Ian and Jen, because we will come to those soon. But before we go there, while you're thinking about them, about what's resonating, what's happening for you, where those questions are, and maybe provocations back as well. I'm just going to dive in with a couple of questions for our panelists first. And the first one, I'm going to throw this back at Robin, because we've just talked about local. And over the pandemic, we've seen a focus on hyperlocal in audiences. That has been really clear that kind of that notion of where you live and what you do is really important. And so it's a question for you, and then we'll pass it round whether this focus will be maintained as museums reopen. And I know your museum is a different context, but what do you see happening, and where do you see the challenges in this going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope so. I really hope so, because personally, I think it's always really important that a local communities have ownership of their local museums. And I suppose here I'm talking more in urban settings where there is a kind of a really local community to museums and galleries that's kind of closer by. And I hope that some of these kind of lowering the barriers to engagement from museums, these things will continue. I mean, it's something that I think is, because of the flexibility that we have as a small museum and because of the nature of moving around, it's something that's so ingrained in kind of our mission. Migration is part of all our stories, and everybody to feel that it's relevant and everybody to feel represented in our museum. So it's like kind of to the heart of what we do. I mean, in terms of challenges, I do think that it's about kind of, sometimes it's just not, it's as kind of Ian was talking about, resources have been shifted in order to go and meet people where they're at. And I think that as museums reopen, there is this push-pull of, well, we went to go and meet them where they're at, but actually now we have we have ongoing plans, we have things that we need to, that we've already committed to. I mean, already, I think this football campaign that we've done and Heart of the Nation, neither of those were planned to be delivered in the way that they were. We had plans to digitize an existing exhibition, and I can already feel that push-pull of, okay, so what does that look like when these different work streams come? I hope that it's been shown that there is enough value from local audiences, that those will become priorities. And I think that for us, we know it, but whether that kind of translates back. But I do think it's pushed under diversity and inclusion and what well-being means, and that shift, hopefully, will encourage museums to prioritise the value of kind of local communities and what they do, what do we do for local communities?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I can see Jen and Ian both nodding as well. Ian, what's your sense of what the challenges are around that kind of hyper-localism as museums reopen?
Well, I think just actually picking up the last thing that Robin said was the Mend project was kind of funded for 9 months, and which kind of was really good because we kind of like, in our kind of like quantifiable hours, I could say that's 4 days of your work you're doing Mend, and I kind of push back against this constant wheel of programming that we do on site. Yeah. But this looming idea of when the sites start reopening and the conversations start happening, and it's, are they going to be involved in this project? What are we going to do here? And suddenly you feel like that space that you've kind of created almost to kind of free up their thinking, which never really happens. It was a real luxury to be able to do that, to kind of push back and allow them to think for a long time about a process. I can see that kind of like, being squeezed, and it's just trying to like squeeze it back and, being like, okay, well, we've shown that this is a way that we can do things successfully. Doing stuff with new audiences, diversifying and working with communities is not separate to doing great stuff on site. They are the same thing. And they can be the same thing, and it's just that kind of that culture change within an organization to think that there's two things, community and inReach, and they're not. And that's a challenge, because if it doesn't exist kind of above you, governance, trustees, or however you're funded, it's really hard. It's even if you've got a massive groundswell of like participation and learning and children, young people, communities pushing their way up, there's still this kind of like ceiling of other people like, no, we're doing an exhibition on this. And there's a challenge there, but it's having discussions like this with people, rally cries of us all saying, no, it's not good enough, must do better. But that hopefully will change. But yeah, I mean, it's challenging.
Thanks. And building on that notion, Jen, because Ian's kind of segued into that question of leadership here and around governance and the senior team as well, and what that means around audiences. So where do you feel the responsibilities of leaders in the museum and gallery sector are to their audiences, and the shifts that have happened?
Yeah, thanks. I think working on from what Ian was saying, I feel an absolute weight of responsibility to continue the working practices that we proved we could do over the last 15 months. So it was so interesting to hear Robin talk about red tape. Being part of a university and in a listed building, the amount of red tape that I work within. And actually, I loved Ian's point around innovation within your own context. Okay, so it might not be innovative in the world, but actually to make change within your context. And if your context is a ton of red tape, it's a responsibility to keep pushing and innovate within that context and feel proud of that and take momentum from that. I think there's a real risk of us as organisations, bricks and mortar, particularly if you are in a red tape context, going back to this thing of programming 2-3 years ahead, no flex, no responsiveness, and that active listening starts to shut down. And it's like, we can't do that because we've set our programme. We can't do that because we need 6 months notice. I mean, even on a very practical level, our audiences, if it's online events, the average days in advance they're booking for an event now is 1 to 2 days for an online event. Before COVID, we were programming kind of 6 months in advance. The timelines just don't add up anymore. So we've really, as Ian was saying, we've got to push back against that, going back to an entrenched kind of organisational position of being, this is our timeline, you either work with that or you don't, go away. There's a real responsibility there. I feel it on my shoulders, but I do talk around thinking around organisations, whether that's our teams, our stakeholders, our partners. I use the phrase this kind of like post-COVID, if you want to use that term, spectrum. What's the appetite for change and what pace can people handle? So if you're the change maker, who are you bringing with you and who's left behind at the other end of the spectrum going, I cannot cope with this change. And that may be that they can't cope with it on a personal level. It may be that they can't cope with it organisationally. I loved Ian's thing around, we're doing this brilliant work. Why is everyone on the team not putting down their tools and coming with us? You know, we feel like that with Barber Health. We've just done a staff survey across the whole of the Barber to assess how Barber Health has landed with the whole team. And that's staff members who aren't working directly on that. And it's to kind of counter that, there is that kind of engagement ethos of, why is everyone not coming with us? And it's our responsibility to bring everybody with us.
Lovely. Thanks, Jen. And that notion of time you've picked up, and there's a question I'm going to dive into. There's a few questions in the chat which are really interesting as well. So I'm going to dive in there because they're all picking up on your themes around time and change and how you bring people with you, and that sense of kind of pace as well, which was also referred to in your provocations. So there's a question here from Jenny, who says thanks to all of you as well. She loves the notion of making space to breathe, personally feeling like the last 18 months have seen the spotlight shone on engagement practice, and therefore the pressure has ramped up, which I think I recognise that as well. Her question is, do you put a clear timeline on programmes of work to ensure you can learn from them and measure from their impact? I'm going to throw that to Ian. What do you do?
So for the Mend project, we definitely set a timeline, and it was slightly because of the funding. So it was easy to do that. But at the very beginning, we started talking about, I think legacy has become a bit of a dirty word really in the culture sector, but we started thinking about what is it going to be towards the end. So what do we want, not just what do we want from the project, but what do we want to be at the end? So we took the 9 months of funding from Art Fund as a real, like a way of us researching something. And it's kind of shifted a little bit. I think we've slightly extended it, but we did definitely put a timeline in. And one of the great things about having different people within your team with different skill sector, and I'm definitely, let's say, a bit lackadaisical on the old admin, but people within my team, Ella, who's here, is kind of really up and interested in monitoring and evaluation. So we're constantly reflecting on what we're doing. I'm hearing what they're doing all of the time, whether that's through our WhatsApp channel, through our Instagram account, through their kind of the blogs that they do. So we're constantly reflecting what we're doing. We're even changing practice as we're going along. There's a nice flexibility to how we are approaching it because we've been really open-ended and vague with what we're trying to achieve. And because we said we'd try and be useful, it's enabled us to have that kind of flexibility through vagueness, which I know is not terribly easy to report on. But yeah, we definitely did have a timeline. You know, I like a timeline, but we like to shift it a bit.
It's building in that space, isn't it? That space to pause, to reflect, to learn, which is really important, actually. And that leads on to another question that we've got here from Hannah, which is about action research. And Jen, this is something you flagged specifically, but I'm hearing that you all kind of practice in that way as well. So Hannah asks, tell me more about action research and team learning through practice. How do you facilitate that within your teams? So I'm going to go to Jen directly, and then Robin, if you've got stuff on that as well, I'll come to you too. But Jen first.
Yes, it's a really good question.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that. There's some really kind of practical things that I did to embed it. So even kind of making a change to job descriptions and putting in a little section, and I managed to break through the red tape to do this, you know. It's like putting in a section around you are responsible for facilitating critical practice within the team. You are responsible for engaging in shared learning in the team. You are responsible for, you know, we call it CPD, but whatever that looks like. So even in the job descriptions, I wanted it embedded in so that we can then make sure that we're kind of putting that in from day one. Then it's around, you know, as a leader of the teams, it's about creating that ethos, and that's easier said than done. And, you know, there's whole books written on that. But I think leading by example is really key. So whether that's setting up projects as action research, as Ian said, in very practical ways with timelines and that building in that reflection, or whether it's actually me engaging in that action research. You know, everything I do is action research. So if I lead that from the top, it enables everyone else to enjoy and facilitate that kind of culture, I suppose. So we have lots of, across the learning team and then across our organisation, we do lots of collective working, lots of critiquing, team members support other team members on other projects, even if it's not their project, these kind of things. And really that it's okay to say something didn't work, but as long as we then have that conversation around why it didn't work and what we've learned from it. So it takes a while if you're kind of building up a culture, building up any good habits and good culture, you know, it takes time, but it's worth that investment. But as I say, there's those practical things you can do around kind of building it in from day one, whether that's project planning or role descriptions would be a suggestion.
Lovely. Thanks, Jen. And Robin, when you spoke, I heard you saying about how you've tried something and it didn't work. So you're listening to ideas, you know, you're adapting to change, and reflecting on practice. So for you.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Jen said. So I think probably the most valuable thing that I could add to this would be around kind of digital in particular. It was something that kind of came up earlier when you were talking about well, firstly, actually, I think that the fact that we have to move often and that we don't really know means that when you move to a space, I mean, our last space was on Lambeth High Street, which is the only high street in the UK that doesn't have a shop on it, 0 footfall, really central, right by Westminster Bridge, but just a completely different challenge for engagement to being in a shopping centre. So when you're making those transitions, you're immediately reflecting on everything. You're really closely studying the audiences and you're really thinking on your feet. So I think that's something that naturally as a team, we all have to be quite dynamic with that. And I think that it's something that we encourage as a team. I think that to kind of reflect on how that impacts in terms of leadership. Different team members need stability in other ways. So you have to provide stability where there isn't stability in terms of necessarily knowing what location you're going to be traveling to, knowing kind of how you're going to find the museum, how you're going to find the space in terms of how many people there are. So I suppose there's something on that, but I think that particularly on digital, it's so important to have this flexibility, and kind of action learning is so embedded into digital, because whether we're thinking about a paid social media ad, you're looking at it, you see that it's not doing that well, you're obviously going to pull it because you can see in front of you the numbers going up in terms of kind of return on investment in real time. So I think it's having that flexibility and staff members having that confidence in digital to kind of say, to pull back sooner than you might do physically and in real life. And I think a great example of that was with Heart of the Nation, which is our online exhibition. We had this Instagram campaign where, so when we conceived it, it was at a time when everyone was completely zoomed out. There were so many Zooms. And we thought, and we noticed this kind of this sign up trend, and people signing up and not necessarily coming, and people kind of wanting shorter and shorter lead times. So we did an Instagram live. We did a series of Instagram live conversations, taking it to where people were at kind of 7 p.m. on an early in the week evening. And the first one was amazing. And then really, we should have seen it coming. Instagram Reels was on its way up, right? TikTok obviously has been big for a while. No, the algorithm changed. All our feed posts were getting like minimal likes. Instagram lives aren't a good idea. People don't watch Instagram TV in the same way. So we really pushed back on the space, our funder, and said, we want to reallocate this. We want to do less lives, and we want to cut down the existing content we've got from these lives into series of reels and push them out instead. And so I think it's about not being afraid to make those pushes. And also in digital, you're at the whim of these major platforms. Anything can happen. So that kind of forces you to be an active learner in many ways. Yeah.
Thank you. There's something really important about action research kind of type approach and taking risks and trying stuff and learning from it, isn't it? And that's what you've demonstrated beautifully there. Russell has posed a very brilliant question, which I'm going to ask all of you. So just sort of a minute each, if that's all right, on this one. So Russell, thank you for this. What one aspect of each other's practice, as described today, would each of you borrow from each other, and what would you do with it? I think it's a beautiful question. Ian, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can. I would definitely borrow the idea of being more hyperlocal and looking really where the kind of the hyperlocal stories are and really celebrating those. And I think one of the challenges we might have in Kendal could maybe be alleviated through this. It would be a really great way to see. Also, you know, I would borrow the fact that that work, the Migration Museum, just looks, you know, high quality, although it's obviously moving around, you know, in different spaces. You know, there's a real quality look to that as well, which I think is fabulous. And I think I'd also borrow from Barber this idea of actually reflecting a change within people's roles and actually writing that within their roles. So that people are aware. And I'd also write it into other people's roles, people that aren't in participation learning, people that aren't in engagement. I'd write that into their roles, and that's everyone's responsibility. So yeah, and I'm going to do those two things. So there you go.
Nice takeaways. Thank you, Ian. Jen.
I think I'd like to congratulate Russell on the question of the afternoon. It's such a great question. Yeah, so from Robin, I love that phrase in terms of communities. Yeah, help us do our stuff and help us do it better. So don't come in and do stuff for us that we don't need. I just thought, what a great phrase, and we should, you know, get it on a t-shirt. It's brilliant. So that is an ethos to take away. And then with Ian, it was around, well, there was, I suppose it's phrases. You can tell I'm a fan of like phrases and words. If it's a good project with good intentions, then it's a good project. And actually remembering that, and whether the intentions panned out as you planned or not, that actually, and this notion of being useful and what use is and what use looks like. So those are my takeaways.
Lovely. Thanks, Jen. Robin, what for you?
There were lots, but I'll try and keep it brief. So Jen, I think it was asking the team how they found the projects, whether or not they've worked on it or not, and just kind of actually sometimes we're talking about space and having space to reflect and how we all need space, but sometimes we don't reflect on always how the wider team and our colleagues are feeling about what we're doing and what their experience of it is. And I think kind of linked to that, Ian, was what you said about kind of not expecting, because it's an exciting project, you want everyone to, well, you would kind of expect everyone to drop everything. And if any of my team are watching this, I'm so sorry, because I know that's how I am about football. Because it's my life. So sometimes so I think that's, and also Ian, I liked what you said about, it's okay to be vague sometimes, actually. it's okay to, that's better, because the project will go the way that it goes rather than being super prescriptive. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Massive thanks to the three of you. We're coming to a close now, and another question that's been thrown in the chat. So I'm going to ask for literally a 1-sentence response to it, if that's possible. So question about digital. So Robin, I'm going to throw it at you, if that's all right. Are you questioning your role in digital colonialization? And is this a topic you have started to think about and discuss?
I'm afraid I actually don't know what you mean by digital colonization.
Getting some shakes. Jen, does it sound familiar? Julia, if you want to explain a bit more, go for it. And it might be something
really intrigued.
Thank you for putting the reference to the paper in the chat as well. We are nearly at time, so the link is helpful. Maybe it might be a takeaway to have a ponder on. Thank you for putting it there, though. Really,
you want to email me and have a it's a big one to get into, but happy to talk to you about it. I'll put my email in the chat.
There you go. There you go. No, it's fine. It's good. It's good. The thoughts are flowing. So it leaves me just to wrap this. Because of Russell's beautiful question, I'm not going to ask you to share top tips or takeaways, because you've done that already. So thank you, Russell, for intervening beautifully with that. I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to Jen, Robin and Ian for being here and for being so candid and so honest about your experiences over the past 15, 16 months. We know it's been a journey and a roller coaster for everybody, so thank you. And of course, a huge thank you to Claw Leadership and to the Art Fund for working together to make these webinars possible for all of us. And to all of you for attending, for taking your time on a sunny Friday afternoon, I hope it's where you are, to join us and to hear this brilliant conversation. A reminder, this will be on the Art Fund and Claw Leadership websites in case you want to play back and scribble down notes or whatever it is you want to do. But a huge thank you. Enjoy your Friday afternoons, enjoy the weekends, I'm not going to say it, but have a lovely weekend, whatever happens on Sunday. And lovely to have you all with us this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.